and welcome to Tiny Tide Storytime. My name is Elizabeth, and today we'll be reading First Salmon, written by Roxane Beauclair Salonen and illustrated by Jim Fowler. The season of First Salmon had returned to Arcadia Point. Walking with his mother and two sisters, Charlie carefully worked his way around a thicket of thorny blackberry bushes. At the clearing, he paused to breathe in the sweet smoke of burning green alder wood, but it was not as sweet as he'd remembered. He could see the elders getting ready, like bees at the honeycomb. He walked toward the shoreline and stared into the inlet waters. First Salmon would never be the same without Uncle Joe, he thought. Last summer they had come together, early enough for Uncle Joe to teach him how to skip rocks. Now Charlie crouched down and sorted through the pebbles at his feet until he found 5 of the flattest. Trying hard to remember what Joe had shown him, he flung the first pebble and watched in disappointment as the water swallowed it in one gulp. But with each toss, he remembered the feel of his uncle's hands guiding his own, and soon he was skipping pebbles just as Joe had taught him. "I miss you, Uncle Joe," he whispered into the air. "Please come back." A woolen robe brushed against Charlie's shoulder. One of the Salish ceremonial dancers moved past him. In 2 rows facing each other, the dancers began to beat small, painted, pale ivory drums made of elk hide. One led a chant to call the first salmon of the season from its watery home. "Pa-ta, ta-ta," sang the drums as tired waves lapped the shore. The rhythm seemed to pull Charlie into the cool water, where he could sense another person near him. Uncle Joe, he thought. He remembered how good it felt to be in the water with his uncle, warm and cozy, like the wool blanket his mother pulled over him on the coldest nights. In his mind, Charlie let Joe show him how to swim like the salmon, the sleek, slippery silver salmon. Charlie tried an underwater somersault and came up giggling. With each stroke and turn, the deep sorrow that had been with Charlie ever since his weeping mother told him, "Joe's gone," began to fade. The drums stopped, pulling him back. Charlie watched 4 members of the ceremonial team grasp the handles of a large cedar tray and walk, footsteps in unison, to the water's edge. Beyond the tray, Charlie caught the flicker of a cedar canoe. It was the one Uncle Joe had carved. Charlie imagined he was stepping in. As he pushed off with one paddle, he felt Uncle Joe beside him. "Wahiha, wahiha," called a loon as the canoe glided along the bay. Charlie watched the gulls, the mergansers, and grebes flitting about gathering their afternoon snack. Fish from a run of Chinook salmon took turns popping up near the canoe as if to say, "Hello." Charlie leaned over and saw the tail of the last one disappear. He noticed his smiling reflection in the water. A breeze rushed by, bringing scattered voices of men from the shoreline, where the real canoe sat. He saw 2 of the men reach into the boat and bring out a large fish, the first salmon, on a bed of cedar boughs. Lowering the fish onto the tray, they carried it to a large table and began to slice away its bright orange flesh until all that remained was a shiny skeleton. The pattern of the fish bones made Charlie think of the willow chair in Joe's house. He imagined Uncle Joe sitting in it as he had so many times, and in his thoughts, Charlie climbed into Joe's lap, ready for the stories he knew would come. "Back in your great-grandfather's day, when the elk walked the earth in abundance," Uncle Joe began, "there lived a blue salmon. He was the largest, most beautiful salmon of the underwater world, and all salmon looked to him as their leader." But in time, Joe said, the newest generations grew restless with his leadership and began to ignore his wisdom. Some even refused to swim upstream when the time to do so came. With each act of disobedience against him, Joe continued, the great salmon's scales slowly turned from vibrant blue to gray, and he weakened. Offering up his last breath for his fish brothers, Joe said, the blue salmon cautioned them. True happiness comes only from following the flow of nature's voice. As the last of his blue scales vanished, so did he, and salmon everywhere swam around directionless forevermore. Muffled sounds of footsteps on sand made Charlie's eyes open in time to see the men walking back toward the water. Gently they floated the fish's remains to show its salmon brothers how respectful they had been, giving the other salmon confidence to return to the tribe. "We'd like some of you to tell us why you are here today," said George, the ceremonial leader. "This, we hope, will bond you to the ceremony and help our tradition go on." A short, round woman with a quiet yet steady voice stood up. "From an early age, my parents taught me to admire the salmon for their strength in facing difficult situations," she began. "In coming here each year to honor the salmon, I also honor my parents and all my ancestors." A man with white braids and deep lines in his face said he had come to give thanks to his salmon kin, who, through their nourishment, had helped give him a long life. Listening to their stories, Charlie began to feel hungry for the first time in days. But as he looked toward the fire being tended for the salmon feast, smoke from the coals brought his mind once more to Uncle Joe. Sitting cross-legged on the floor by the fireplace, Joe flashed Charlie his "Let's see who's best" look. With folded arms and pursed lips, Uncle Joe blew until the caw-caw sound of a crow squeaked out, at least 2 pitches too high. Charlie let out a snicker, which made Joe burst out laughing. Joe put his arm around Charlie, and the two roared until their stomachs hurt and tears began to roll out of Charlie's eyes. The call of a real fish crow nearby grabbed Charlie's thoughts. Watching the crow ruffle its feathers, he smiled. A feeling of contentment, like that of a sea pigeon folding its wings at day's end, settled in his heart. Uncle Joe was in the earth, in everything good to touch and see and smell, and all Charlie needed to do was hold on to the memories they had woven together. He turned with the direction of the wind and made a silent vow to walk forward with courage. In this, he knew he would not be alone. Accepting his heaping plate of seafood and corn, Charlie spotted his mother, sisters, and grandparents in the shade of the fir and maple groves, and joined them. Like the salmon, he had returned to a welcoming place of belonging, a place of bold blue like the waters nearby. And like the honey on his fry bread, life once again seemed warm and sweet. Thank you for joining us on today's Tiny Tides Storytime. If you enjoyed our video, please give it a like, and if you wish to continue getting more of our videos, please subscribe to our YouTube channel or follow us on Facebook at the Puget Sound Estuarium.